Democracy can be loosely defined as a way of governing that is dependent on the will of the people. South Africa is almost 30 years into democracy, but is that the way in which we are experiencing democracy as South Africans? My name is Sihle Bolani and welcome to the Workplace Revolution. Today I'm joined by Sihle, who is a corporate attorney and founder of #Country Duty, a social movement founded as a response to empower South Africans to be more action-oriented in relation to matters that affect the country and communities we live in. He has many accolades, and if you have interacted with Dumi on any platform, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I'll share just a few. Aside from being the founder of #Country Duty, he is the creator and founder of #Running with Sihle. He is Mail and Guardian Top 200 Young South Africans from 2019, Top 100 Most Influential Young South Africans in 2019, Top 100 Most Influential Young Africans in 2020, featured on Destiny Magazine in 2020, panelist at the Twitter event through the #StartWithThem, and so much more. Dumi, welcome to the Workplace Revolution.
Thank you, Sihle, and thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So, where does a lawyer find the time to be so active? Particularly, I got to know you through Twitter.
Yeah.
And I would say predominantly because of #Country Duty.
Yeah.
What is it that inspired you to begin to create conversations? Because we understand that the nature of hashtags is to drive and monitor conversations.
100%.
What led to Country Duty?
I think Country Duty came as a result of what was happening in the country back in the days. I think that was 2018 or so. You'd recall there would be a time where we'd have to just wake up and suddenly there's a cabinet reshuffle. But over and above that, I'd say the trajectory of the country was worrying. And I'll talk to that even now, for example, because there's the for and against type of debate. But for me, it was an opportunity because people on Twitter already, worried, they were already having a conversation. And what then became important is to have a structured place to find that conversation. And it was through the power of the #Country Duty. And really coining it was more of, this is beyond Dumi, this is beyond the colleagues and people that were on Country Duty, but it's you as an individual, you as a citizen who has a voice and can really share on what's happening in the country.
What you're saying is so important because, whether you're thinking about it in the context of South Africa as a country that we're all citizens of, or whether you're considering it in the context of the workplace,
Yeah.
right? We often sit in our little spaces as individuals and we want things to change, or we want things to happen, but we don't see ourselves in that picture. We don't put ourselves in that picture to say, okay, so how do I take personal responsibility to be able to contribute for the benefit of the greater whole, for the collective?
Yes.
So what would you say are some of the things that inspire you to be so dedicated to doing work that is going to be of benefit to the greater whole?
Thank you. And I think that's a very important question. I think, when you realize, for example, that there's a lot that one has been exposed to. I was born and bred in Soweto. I went to a Soweto school, went to Wits, and now I'm in and around Joburg with the family. But every time I go home, it's still that road that closer to the elections is still getting fixed. It doesn't make sense. There have been instances where the councillor would be a councillor of the area but doesn't reside there. And these are just one but few of these examples. But in a country where, for example, the youth has an active voice, at the time I was still a youth, so I'm not going to reveal my age, but I just want to say that, social media, Twitter in particular, gave one an opportunity to be saying, it doesn't just help to stay in your corner, come out, let's talk about this and come up with solutions. And really that has led to various initiatives coming on. I remember, and I'll just mention one just to contextualize why, for example, example, this was more than to me, but more for the collective good and the country. There was a motion of no confidence that was set down, I think, in Parliament. I just forgot the date. And the question was, because country duty was not just only about to me. It was actually interesting because we had, and we still have, people that we've never met, but other than speak on Twitter and DMs and Telegram, for example, where we say, your skill set is probably IT, for example. You have this other skill set. How do we bring those together in a way that can benefit South Africans or rather raise awareness, for example? And then one of the guys was like, I'm in IT, I actually have an understanding of how Twitter works. How about we start a hashtag within Country Duty where we get people to hold government and ministers to vote accordingly? And because there was litigation on the secret ballot and everything, we then said at 12, for example, a Twitter feed will be scheduled and it will drop at a certain time. And what we then did was we found the ministers' numbers on the Parliament website. That's actually public information that people can get. And then we then scheduled tweets and it'd say, Minister Mbalula, at 2 o'clock, you're about to vote, do it for your country and do your country duty. And at that time, I was sitting in a meeting because these are scheduled tweets and they would go at any given 10 minutes. And it would drive the ministers insane. It would really just result in a conversation. And it was picked up. Again, the power of technology, power of the collective. But that's really how we then said, let's put the country first. We understand your political allegiances, but this is bigger than the country at that time.
No, absolutely. And, you raise such an important point about, being able to understand that we all have different things that we can contribute, and this is something that I also speak about in my first book, We're the Ones We Need, where, in my encouraging Black professionals to work as a collective is with what you have, where you are, what can you do that helps us shift the needle.
Yeah.
But in South Africa, socially, the context is a huge number of South Africans don't have the level of education that would enable them to be able to think in that way.
Yes.
They don't have the tools to be able to contribute in the ways that we speak about because we're social media savvy.
Yes.
We are, in tune with what's happening, what's
100%.
hot. We have the words, the language, all of these things. We understand nuances. Yeah. But a huge portion of our population does not understand.
Correct.
And so often you find people are just feeling helpless, hopeless.
Yeah.
And what's the point? Better the devil you know.
And it's often the discussion and rather a held view. But I think with people with power, with, influence, for example, it's, incumbent upon them to make a change and drive that change within their respective communities. I think over and above us, I would say, calling us sophisticated, we need to start being agents in our communities and say, I come from Soweto, Dobsonville. These are the issues affecting my community, my street. What is it that I can do, with the little power or influence that I have? And I think once we start galvanizing like that, it then can blow up and become something else. Because it was easier on Twitter, for example, because it's a hashtag, it's a view, and you start being critical. And one thing about Twitter is, you learn so much. It could be a very toxic, and it's often toxic, right? But you need to take what's important, and if anything, use that block button if it becomes too much for you and move on and curate content that you really relate to. But I think it's really a calling for all of us, agents of change, to do our part in respective communities.
Absolutely. So 29 years into a democratic state. And, when we had the first democratic elections, it was on my 11th birthday. Yeah. It was a very long time ago.
Yes, I think also we said we are not going to be discriminating on the basis of age, right?
And, when I reflect on what I was led to believe I can expect from this new reimagined Rainbow Nation versus what I've actually been experiencing, it's been very jarring.
Yeah.
Because obviously, it's a good thing that we are not in apartheid. There's no debating that.
Absolutely.
However, we have some very, very big, deep-seated issues that we're actually dealing with as a country. You know, you speak a lot about being a representative and an advocate for your community, because that's where it starts. You know, that those are the issues that you're most familiar with, and those are the people that need a voice, you know, and for us to be able to reflect on, with the privilege that I have and the access that I have, how can I better serve my community?
Right.
What are some of the things that for you and your community in particular are the, you know, are the things that really kind of stand out for you, or the things that keep you awake at night, or the things that you really are just like, we really have to fix this thing?
Yeah. So one, in fact, there's quite a few, but and more so because often when I go home, I see it, right? And this talks to these roads that are not fixed, for example, crime, how it's so escalated that is suddenly become uncontrollable. And we need to also say to the communities, it's not only government's responsibility. And I think the danger is always people thinking that we are always critiquing government. But what we are saying is, how do we then have government with the resources, private sector, for example, helping us bridge that gap? So in my community, for example, there's less sporting facilities, you know, and therefore the default could be crime or drugs or otherwise. I've had friends who've used drugs, and some of them died, some were hooked on that, and became a choice of school, this other life, and doing things differently. And I think, for example, as I said, the roads, the infrastructure, essence of dignity. You know, when we moved in, starting from a shack and ultimately seeing it, and mom leaving work and building a house, for example. But there are shacks over and above the community that are come in. People are still struggling for the basic needs, and ultimately, it's a situation of better the devil we know than really changing the status quo. And that's why we need more change agents in communities that can say, I now have access. How do I involve the Ministry of Sports to come and help, or rather come up with programs? If we are talking to the Department of Social Services, how do we then talk smart IDs and be able to have a community wall being Wi-Fi empowered for that day, and people are able to register? So we need to be thinking differently and doing things differently. But this having the same people, the older people deciding for us, I think it's definitely going to come and haunt us.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the things I was going to mention was around the fact that we do have a younger population now,
Yes.
right? But at the same time, the younger population is largely disengaged from politics.
Yes.
For a number of reasons. One, they don't believe in the leaders that we have. They don't trust the leaders that we have. Sometimes you hear comments like, there's no point in voting, so I'm just not going to vote for anyone.
Yes.
You know, there's so many people in this country, and particularly young people, who just feel that their voice doesn't matter.
Yes.
And now we are starting to feel the wave of the 2024 national elections coming up.
Yes.
And you and I are part of a really beautiful and really, really important campaign where we are actually focusing on helping younger South Africans to understand why your voice is important, why it matters, and why you actually must register to vote.
Yeah.
Why did you decide that being a part of the Rainbow Leaders campaign makes sense for you?
I think that was an easy one for me, because, as I said, coming from a community like I've been at and grew up in, the challenges that the community still continues to face, the issues that we read on social media, for example, where crime, women, GBV-related issues, and other issues that they can be solved, or rather people be heard through voting, for example. So when I was approached, it became, listen, this makes sense. If I can use my influence and power, for example, or awareness to say there's 36 plus million people in South Africa, and 18 million of those are the youth. That's a very critical number that can change the status quo, right? That's the number where instead of just complaining, can be able to say, we've given them a chance, we need someone else. And again, how do we then, over and above social media, take it to the next level? So when Rainbow Leaders came and approached me and we were able to say to them, let us use this opportunity like what we're doing now, and hopefully people will be able to watch and also provide us with their views and say, how do I then become a change agent? So that was for something that I could relate to, something that I believe in. And I think over and above this discussion, we'll be having an opportunity to be engaging with these communities and saying it does not help to stay at home.
That's absolutely true. And, one of the things that I resonated with, when this campaign was presented to me was the fact that Rainbow Leaders is dedicated to reducing the inequality that exists in the country and promoting democracy. And it's very difficult to promote democracy and a culture of democracy in a country where its citizens are not participating in the process. And so it becomes even more important for those of us who actually do have the platforms, who do have audiences that connect with us, communities online and offline, where we can leverage that access and those platforms to be able to help people understand that actually it's about all of us. If Dumi doesn't do his part, it affects me. If I don't do my part, it affects you. And I think drilling it down to that level where you understand that it's not just about you or your home, it's the impact is so far reaching. Because when you think about the fact that there are, 18 million 18, 19-year-olds, right? And over 90% of them didn't even register to vote in the local government the last local government elections. That is a huge portion of voices that have not been heard.
But it's the same voices that will also feel that they're not being listened to.
Exactly.
Right? And that power, it's the one that they hold. Now, I think it's that opportunity for us to be able to say, we start in this conversation, and how do we then cascade it down further with our listeners and our audiences and say to them, you actually have this power. I think people who would be watching would be saying, well, yes, that's great and that's important, but what about the bread and butter issues, for example, right? But I think if we have leaders that are really thoughtful, that are caring for the people, that understand that this unemployment rate that still goes up, it's a ticking time bomb. It's just a matter of time, really, that all of us will be facing and dealing with this face on, that opportunity and having people who care and can come up with policies that reduces unemployment, that at least enables that women and children in particular in a safe place, that's the voice and opportunity, and that's what a vote I think can do and will do. So it doesn't really help once again to stay at home.
And I think one of the other things that really impedes our ability to have meaningful conversations about this topic in particular is how there is often a pressure or an influence to compartmentalize our lives. So when you think about the workplace and you start to, or you want to have a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, then it's like, oh no, that's too political. We don't talk about that stuff at work. And yet everything about my identity as a black woman 100%. In a white corporate South Africa is political.
Absolutely is.
Right?
And interestingly, it also then suddenly matters when you're looking at the BE status, the BE report, the equality or employment equity report and stuff like that, where who's in senior management, what does it look like, what does the transformation policy. But you're absolutely right. It, whatever happens in society, it extends further to corporate SA. And again, it's a calling for them to do their part. I think with the money that they have, they need to be able to fund these type of initiatives where they say, we know that it's a very sophisticated place, but voter education is important. Not influence who to vote for, but rather
Right.
the importance of voting and why, for example, not voting is not helpful. And I think everyone, if they care about this country, that's what they need to be looking at and doing as corporate SA, for example.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that I have found just from the many election processes that
Yes.
I've witnessed is how the narratives just across the board when you speak about elections and politicians, it's an old narrative. It's I'm not youth, but even for me, I'm like, this doesn't even resonate with me, right?
Yeah.
And even less so for, I have an 18-year-old,
Yeah.
and she's just like, what on earth, what in the ghetto
Yes,
is happening here?
There's no vibes here, right? It's
I'm
not
not
giving,
feeling this.
as they say. Yeah.
Right? It's not giving,
Yes,
as they
yes,
say.
yeah.
What do we need to be saying to young people that will help them feel like, okay, maybe it is worth a shot?
Yeah. And that's a very important question. For my 13-year-old daughter, I think if they do not take this calling serious, the 16, the 21-year-old that will be watching this, they will be sitting like you and I in 2040 and saying, we need to vote, we need to encourage the youth. I think it's time that they do their part. They listen, they are accessible, right? They are here on their phones and everything. They read and they ask the right questions. But I also think there's an opportunity, for example, with the basic education department, where, from a curriculum perspective, why voting is important. Not influencing who to vote for, but that power that the voting comes with, because this is a constitutionally enshrined right. People died for this, and we can talk about everything else, the right to economic freedom and access to the workplace and why it should be. But when it comes to the right to vote, it's somewhat a political issue or terrain, and we don't delve into it. It's time that when we speak about 4IR, we need to include this voting that says then the leaders that we are going to select, they will be equally capable to really take us to the next revolution. It's very sad if you look at some of the recent studies on literacy and what the country is facing. There's then this, percentage between those who can read and those who can't, especially at grades 1, foundation phase 1 to 4, for example. And the biggest majority are kids in rural areas. Our kids, for example, are privileged, right? And we need to say that. But what about those who aren't able to access education? Situations where recently, if you've seen the news, the budget in the Eastern Cape for housing and education was returned to National Treasury. But every 2 days or every expose on TV, we hear about mud schools in the Eastern Cape. Things not happening. So to the little ones, to those ones who will be watching and really asking, why is this important? You do not want to be sitting here in 2040 and still trying to come up with solutions. You need to be able to say, it's our time now. This leader has not delivered according to the promises that they made, and therefore let's recall. How do we then influence a change in the electoral system with a way of saying, if there's no accountability, there's a performance review or whatever, and this is how we can get them out, because we really need to do our part, because they'll be left to be having these conversations when we're no longer there.
Absolutely. Just across the board, that's also one of the things that I've always reinforced is if we as this generation don't step up to the challenge that our generation needs to solve, it's going to be left to the next generation, and then their challenge won't be solved. And then it just becomes this kind of knock-on domino effect. And there's such a huge responsibility that each of us has that we actually have to take accountability for.
Absolutely.
We can't hide behind anything or anyone anymore. We actually have to stand up and be counted.
Absolutely. And I also think, it's not pushing one political party over the other. It's about saying these are the leaders that are in society, the leaders that make promises, right? We're promised free education. And the posters were there. If you go Snake Park, Chenguville, and Alex, for example, free housing and all of those things. That was a promise that was made in 1994, 1998, amongst other things, to our parents, right? To say, vote for us, this is what's going to happen. But when that changed, there was no level of engagement, consultation, for example, to say, you know what, we thought we'll come in as the government of the day. Things have changed, but how do we then co-create, co-collaborate with you to change what we initially had promised, and this is what we can do. And I think that's really the bigger issue. I mean, government is doing well in some fronts, right? So, for example, on the housing front, I mean, this government has done, phenomenally well worldwide as compared to other countries in terms of RDP and the likes, and we give kudos to that. Can they do more? Absolutely. And what is more? And does that more mean that the citizens have to be part of that solution? Absolutely. And no one should be left behind. And it's about time that, again, have accountable leaders that make promises. And if they don't deliver, we are able to really ask them why. I mean, if, to anyone who's watching, if you were to ask what were they promised 4 years ago, we'll be thinking, let me just find that video. What did they say? And then it comes back in 2024, a few months from now, couched differently. But it's basically the same thing, together creating jobs, together finding solutions, together doing this. And then ultimately, but that together we're not seeing.
Yeah.
We how do we move from a slogan to action? And I think that's some of the things that are missing in this whole debate in how things have been done in this country. We definitely need ethical leaders. We definitely need leaders that are able to take scrutiny and not see it as, you are pushing an agenda type of stuff, and stuff. Say, listen, I'm not perfect. I've done wrong. However, this is what I'm intending on doing to correct that. And I was probably not listening, or I made this promise 5 months ago. Things have changed, or I was ill-advised. I need assistance. And I think for me, if we were to have leaders like that, it will go a long way because it builds the element of trust. It builds an opportunity to say, well, they're not listening. How do they then, or how do we then come in and make suggestions? I think the danger has always been that some of our leaders speak as if we are all the same, sophisticated, understand how government works or otherwise. People on the ground are angry, they need jobs, they need everything. Let's now start addressing them as real people, because they are. They deserve human dignity. Let's not take them for a ride because of votes. Let's not make those promises that are not going to be realized, because these are dreams that are going to be shattered. And again, for what? A t-shirt and some water? That shouldn't be the case. In fact, and I want to say, it's every government's responsibility to provide that. That grant, it's not from the government of the day. It's a constitutional right. Any government that comes in the US, they call it social, what do you call it? Forgot the word. But some welfare. They'll say I'm on state welfare or whatever. So if ex-government comes in, they have to provide that. So your grant won't be taken away, Gogo, Mama, Malume. It will be provided for. So you shouldn't be worried that your grant, your disability grant, will go away if someone else comes entitled to that, and it's what the state should be providing.
You just to wrap up our conversation, what you mentioned earlier about the types of leaders that we need, people who are able to say, I know I said this, but it has not happened for these reasons, or I have fallen short here, or so this is what I'm going to do to remedy it, or this is the assistance that I need. And if you are one of the people who is happy to assist me, this is how you can get in touch with us. Those things are the most basic tenets of accountability,
yes.
Right? But for them to get to a point where they admit their shortcomings and ask for help, it requires citizens to be able to say, wait a minute,
you said, yeah.
Right? Performance management 101.
Yes.
Right? And you can't do that. You can't hold them accountable if you don't use your voice.
Yeah.
If you don't contribute towards votes, to conversations to, one of the things that we speak about, in the Rainbow Leaders campaign is the fact that if you shift your thinking to seeing South Africa as a company and you are a board member of that company, you're not going to let the CEO just do what they want or the HR director run it into the ground. You're going to be like, I want answers, I want solutions. Otherwise, your time is up.
Absolutely.
Because it's not about the person, right? It's about, are you delivering what we require of you? If you're not, you have an opportunity to fix it. If you don't fix it, you're out.
Absolutely. And again, you are right. We speak of SA Incorporated. This is what it is, right? Some people will say, well, you can't run it like that. But I think from a basic example or tenant perspective from an accountability, we've outsourced it to these political parties. But yet we have someone, a president or a leader of the opposition, and they will belong to a political party. But I think when it comes to solutions, we really need to see more. We need to hear more. The bickering most of the time doesn't help. It doesn't take the country forward. And what we're saying is include the citizens more. And I think it's time also to the organized communities, continue doing your part, but have that element of accountability and being in a position to recall a leader that is not delivering. I think, the way things are structured politically and the voting system, for example, it also makes it difficult if a political party or certain people are like, this one is staying, it then disenfranchises the citizens who are already aggrieved and they don't really have a voice. So it's time that we start saying, how do we empower and being able to then allow citizens to say, we are in the middle of the 4 years. This is year 2 or 2.5. Things have to change. And people will argue that it doesn't work that way. Of course it doesn't work that way because there are programs and otherwise. But I think at the bare minimum, there has to be a level of standard that citizens can be able to know, access, and be able to demand accountability. We've heard about performance agreements. I haven't seen one. Maybe I'm not looking. But every SONA and closer to elections, we get told that there will be these performance agreements and whatnot. If those are there, share it. Let's then say, how do we manage all these leaders that are making decisions on our behalf? So it's access, it's collaboration, co-creating, and for us to come together. And really, we can only achieve that, amongst other things, by voting.
Absolutely. So, Tumi, for anybody who wants to connect with you online, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter. So it's Dumisole. That's my handle. Facebook, the same. Instagram, the same. YouTube, dumisole.com. And you can check out Running with Dumisole, the hashtag if you intend on walking, running, and ultimately joining our running club, which is a social movement as well of runners, of people, really a community as well. So that's where we are, and we would be delighted if really you follow Sihle as well. Check out the work that she does, the power that she holds in terms of sharing experiences, allowing people to be vulnerable, giving us this opportunity to share, not only from listenership, but the sincerity that comes with it. So do your part, follow, engage, share, critique us, and let's have that conversation, because I think that's also what is key.
Absolutely.
We do have blind spots, and I think that's one thing that we would want to hear when we have these conversations with the people.
Absolutely. And I think that's the most critical thing about these conversations. This conversation that we're having is, it's not a conversation about Dumi and I. It's a conversation about all of us, because all of our voices matter. Yeah. Just as much as all of our votes will matter in 2024 and beyond. So that brings us to the end of this week's episode of The Workplace Revolution with me, Sihle Bolani. Dumi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And please do send us your comments, share your thoughts. If you don't want to share them publicly, our DMs are open. We really want to know what you're thinking, what's on your mind, and what you think needs to happen in order for South Africa to truly thrive as a country. I'll see you again next time.